Hello and welcome to another episode of the Best You interview series. It's Gary here again. Thank you very, very much, as always, for taking the time to tune in to this episode. And this is one I have been looking forward to for quite some time. I am delighted to be joined by Chair of the Women in Communications and Technology Alberta Chapter. We'll call that WCT from this point forward. Shannon Lehmann, who is here to discuss her journey in the technology world and how that inspired her to give back to her community via her work role, her professional role, and her volunteer role with WCT. Shannon is currently the Director of IT Integrations at Rogers Communications. And for folks who don't know Rogers Communications, they are an absolute powerhouse in communications and technology here in Canada and has over 20 years of experience in telecommunications, energy, IT, and data. And in her current role, is primarily responsible for resolving friction points through change management, streamlining cross-company access, and integrating and simplifying processes and systems. Having lived in some of those lives before, I know those are not easy things to do, and we might get a chance to talk about that a little bit later. Shannon holds an Executive MBA from the University of Calgary and was recognised as a top 40 under 40 by Avenue magazine. And Shannon has a proven track record of allyship and leadership in both corporate and community settings, with volunteer work with HackerGal, Women at Shaw, Rise at Rogers, and of course WCT. Shannon joined WCT to help progress their strategic imperatives and help inspire and support women to achieve their highest career potential through professional development, mentorship, advocacy, and research. And when Shannon started her technical career, she faced some biases and some egos, so knows how defeating those experiences can be in the moment and latterly after, and especially for women who are already way too hard on themselves. And Sharon is a self-confessed critic, her biggest critic, and she has learned to, over time, to shift her mindset and see that her self-perceived weaknesses were actually her superpowers, and then learned to flex her strengths while cultivating her technical knowledge so that she could add value while also learning. Now Shannon is passionate about helping other women get out of their own way. I love that saying. And to see the value that they can truly bring to themselves and their community. Shannon, thank you very, very much for joining me today. I'm delighted. I'm absolutely delighted. So you have over 20 years experience in a variety of areas, and it wasn't always in technology. I kind of alluded to that just a wee bit there in terms of your bio. You moved from marketing and communications primarily into a technical role. That is not an easy thing to do at all. Tell me a bit more about that. How did it come about?
Well, and I think, when you look forward, some people know exactly where they want to go and it's a straight line. I was not one of those people. And I kind of took a more nonlinear path and just really took opportunities as they presented themselves. And some of those challenges where, you bite off a little more than you can chew, but you know what? You can do it. So I really found for me, I after I did my MBA, I was getting bored being too stuck in one silo and really liked the idea of kind of getting across a company and being able to help them. And
Yeah.
so when I learned of data integration and business intelligence, I realized this is an area where you can work with all parts of the business, from operations to engineering to finance to HR. Everyone has a problem, and data can be one of the solutions to solve it. And broader speaking, technology can be a solution that helps those teams. So ultimately, the things that stayed consistent in my career were my love of helping people, solving problems, and using communications to build your business case, to share your ideas, and to collaborate. Technology just turned out to be the vehicle that I could do even more with. So then you just have that minor learning curve to get over. And I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
very sarcastic with the minor.
Yeah, I was going to say that must be massive air quotes there.
Yeah, but you know what? It was one of those things that I saw the upside and I saw the benefits. So it was like, I can lean in and do this. And it was hard. There were days where it was especially when you're already established a career and you've kind of gotten good in an area, it's very humbling to kind of go back to the basics and
Yeah.
start over and teach yourself and learn and, ask the dumb questions. But, that journey was so exciting because you realize, I was so worried about asking those questions, and you realized you're asking questions that a lot of people didn't know or didn't have consistent answers to. And by being kind of brave enough and vulnerable enough to ask those questions, I actually
Yeah.
realized I was helping a lot of other people in the room learn
Yeah.
and deepen their knowledge. And so that's where I started to shift from like, hey, it's not me being, you know, dumb or whatnot that's asking these questions. It's actually showing that people get better when you have more information. And it's showing kind of by example that if you ask those questions, you get a better answer, you get a better solution, you get a more well-rounded perspective. And sometimes you just kind of have to put yourself out there first.
Yeah. And how did the opportunity come about for you? Was it easy to procure that, even just seriously being taken into consideration, and then through the interview process? How did it come about to the point where
Yeah.
other people were showing faith in you to give you that opportunity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so my first foray was with a smaller boutique consulting firm, and I
Right.
happened to know some of the people, and they had reached out to me saying, "Hey, we need someone to lead client sites. We need someone who's personable." So they knew some of the skills I came in with, and I think they undersold me on how much, my one friend was like, "Oh, you don't have to be that technical." And then I got there, I'm like, "What are you even talking about?"
Yeah.
So I mean, I think I was lucky in the sense that someone saw enough potential in me to take that risk.
Yeah.
And then once I was there, I'm like, well, now I just got to prove that I can do this, and I can't let them down. I can't let me down. And like I said, it was just once you knew that there was a learning curve, it was just a matter of, okay, well, what are the things I need to do to start tackling it? And
Yeah.
how do I bring some of those characteristics and strengths to the table so that I can add value while I'm still learning and kind of deepening my technical knowledge?
Yeah. So you mentioned your own worst critic, or I
Hmm.
mentioned that you're your own worst critic, I guess is the best way to say it. What sort of conversations were you having with the various personalities that are inside Shannon during those times?
Yeah, there's some mean girls up there. I think what really I realized is, all through my high school and university, I'd kind of pigeoned myself into a certain type. So always strong in social and English, not as strong in math and science. So I'm like, that's me. That's where I'm at.
Yeah.
And I realized as I was getting into technical concepts, my default was just like, oh, I'm not this. I'm not good at that. And I was working with one of my developers, and she actually showed me the book Mindsets. And when I
Right.
read that, it was like a light bulb switched in my head. And I
Yeah.
realized that the only thing holding me back was my own perceived notions of what boxes I fit in.
Yeah.
And what I realized is, yeah, maybe I hadn't ever taken a computer science or database design or this or that, but I was really strong at logically solving problems. And I
Right.
was really good at listening to people and learning about their side of the story and then being able to translate that. So, from a
Yeah.
business perspective, you've seen this in your role 100 times, Gary, where the business and the technical teams don't know how to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was like, hey, I can be the technical translator because I can understand enough about both sides, and we can actually bridge that gap and come to solutions
Yeah.
together. And that mindset shift for me was so important because I could understand technical things. I could learn to code and to write
Yeah.
reports and build database designs. And it literally opened up my horizon to a completely different career trajectory.
Yeah.
And you realize, again, the only limits that I had were the ones I had put on myself.
Yeah. It's so powerful to be able to have that epiphany, that aha moment, and realize a lot of it about is the identity that we've self-created, or the identity that served us at a particular point in our lives, that you kind of forget that you can grow out of said identity, you can grow up, you can grow into something else. I've been doing a lot of work with undergraduate students in my role as an instructor. And it was so fascinating. We did a skills exercise. We've done a few skills and strengths exercises, and not the standard stuff that's out there. You just talk about yourself. You just tell me about your skills and your strength, or your strengths and your skills. That's the order we did it in. And in terms of the strengths, fairly well versed at that. I'm good at this. I'm okay at that, and things like that. And it got to skills, and there was a lot of sparseness there, quite frankly. And I'm saying, why have you not listed? You already mentioned previously that you've done a bit of this and you've done a bit of that. Yeah, but I'm not good at it. And I said, that's not what I asked.
Right.
What I asked is whether you have a skill in it. And I think that goes back to identity. The fact that I don't identify as being strong at that. Therefore, I'm not even going to mention that that's a thing. I'm not even going to mention that that's something that's in my repertoire.
And Gary, to build on that, I also think that we downplay what comes naturally to us, and we
Yes.
downplay what we're good at, because if we're not working at it, we're like, well, then it doesn't count.
Yeah.
And and it's funny because I've had people come up to me and say, oh, it must be nice to just naturally be able to present or to talk. And even though that's something I grew up naturally comfortable with, like, I work at that all the time.
Yes.
And it's one of those things that when someone is really strong technically, it's not like they just show up and are smart. They're learning, they're doing. And I find that sometimes, again, if it comes easy, you discredit yourself for that. And so it doesn't come top of mind. But then at the same time, the stuff you're working on, because you're working on it, you're like, well, I'm not good enough. I can't list that. And
Yeah.
it's just funny how, again, we're all our own worst critic in this area.
Yeah, it really is fascinating. And trying to convince them to what we ended up actually doing was, I tell you what, like, give me a novice, intermediate, or expert or specialist classification on it. And then they started to list stuff out there. So, right, okay, it's now okay to put a label on that to say that I've done it, without saying I'm an expert in it, without saying that I have, someone, criticize and say, no, you haven't. No, you're not.
Yeah.
You're not as good as me. And it's just all these stories that people make up based on their particular identity. We've got to a spot now where they're a wee bit more comfortable, but I don't know. I don't know where they'll take this going forward. I hope it just evokes some sort of awareness to say, I'm a writer. Oh, have you published anything? Actually, no. I literally just bought a book yesterday, and I've got a pack of pens somewhere at home, and I'm going to start writing something. So you haven't written anything yet? No, but I'm going to. So I think my skill is the fact that I've taken those first steps, and I'll move on in some sort of intentional way from there.
And it's the journey, like, I don't think you've ever arrived in anything that you're working towards, whether it be a skill or a profession or mindset, whatever the case may be. And the minute you start looking at as like a work in progress, you can start to appreciate that no matter where you are, it's a point in time. And I think that that's one of the things that's really important, especially for females. We have such a harder time taking credit until you got the certification, read the book, done the thing. Whereas I think males naturally are more likely to kind of give themselves credit for the progress. And you've seen this through job applications. Like, a lot of people will have to shift the way they write job descriptions in order to attract a more diverse group of people, like females. Because a lot of times, if females don't have over 90% of the qualifications, they won't even try. Whereas men will go for that role with even 50%. And so a lot of it is just, recognizing that there has been, cultural, environmental, social pressures on women to be so good to even try. So that's, I think, a big part of where I really try to help people, both on an individual basis, but as also with WCT. It's more about, how do you help someone cultivate their confidence? How do you push people to realize their potential, even if they haven't quite got there themselves? And I think that that's one of the things that It took a while for me to figure that out for myself, and it's still a work in progress. But,
Yeah.
it's so much easier to help someone else than it is to help yourself. And so that's why I really enjoy what I do with the WCT board.
It is incredible. I'm so glad you brought that up about the dynamics of job applications as well. It's something I've
Mhm.
often talked about in the class as well, is like literally what's the worst that's going to happen. A job description is a wish list for
Mhm.
the ideal perfect candidate will have every single one of these things. And then sometimes they'll break it down saying these are absolutes. If you don't have these, don't bother applying. Even still, I'm kind of like, yeah, is it though? Because you
Yeah.
just never know what type and styles of candidates they're going to get. You never know what sort of frame of mind or mindset they're going to be in when they're reviewing the applications. I know a lot of it's done electronically now before it gets to a human being, but let's just assume that you manage to navigate that to get to a spot.
Mhm.
Literally, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're not going to hear anything.
And if you take it back to it being about the journey, in your job preparation, you're going to learn more about an industry or company. You potentially
Yes.
might meet some people for informational interviews. So you've
Yeah.
built out your network. More people are going to see you and know where your ambitions lie or that you're going for this. And so, yeah, that particular scenario may or may not work out, but
Yeah.
that journey is so valuable. Even at the worst, you got practice. You got practice
Yeah.
selling yourself in a resume. You got practice talking about yourself and interviewing. And that's all going to compound on itself. So when the right fit does come, you're going to be even more prepared and more confident. So I always tell myself and tell everybody else to, like, you just got to go for it. And the worst that can happen is that you don't do anything.
Yeah.
And one of the things I always think about too is it's impossible to get a yes if you don't try.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You need to put yourself in the game. What would you
Mhm.
say was the biggest, like the single most biggest challenge you had in your transition from your marketing communication expertise to the technical, if you can recall?
Yeah, it was a series of changes. Again, my own mindset shift was probably that one really big pivot, because once that happened, it was just a series of things and
Hmm.
tasks and skills to kind of hone. But I do think that it's trying to also find, where do you contribute while you're learning. And so for me, it was being part of technical programs, but really focusing on the organizational change management components or the
Yes.
communication. Because a lot of times what happens is really great ideas and projects don't get off the ground or don't get the recognition and the visibility and the funding because they haven't been presented in a way that anyone cares.
Yeah.
And so if you can come in and, again, a lot of times technical people don't think in business cases or don't think about the value. Like they've got, well, but this will be better from a back end perspective. This will save us time and money, and this makes better sense architecturally. But to actually say, well, no, this will save people money, this will save people time. Thinking and presenting in that way is so key. And what I found as a technical leader is a lot of those back end teams never got the limelight. They always got the criticism. Everyone's happy to point fingers at the IT team if the things
Yeah.
go wrong, but they never kind of got the reward. And
Yeah.
so bringing people into the limelight, bringing the projects forward to the executive level and actually showcasing those values, that is where I think you can take a technical project, but make it a business value generator.
Yeah, and that's so powerful. I completely agree that the story creation has been something extremely lacking in some very genuine value add projects because they haven't managed to create a story for a particular, avatar or
Hmm.
persona that they're trying to sell it to, to say, right, well, let's have a conversation within our peer group. Okay, everyone understands that. How do we level up? How do we branch out? How do we actually get in the competition first and foremost, and then actually be competing for the scarce resources that are within a particular organization in and of itself. And it's a real shame that, because they know what it can do, but they don't know how to articulate it in, say, for example, business speak or communication speak or
Hmm.
executive speak. And how does that resonate with the strategic imperatives that you have on right now and some of the challenges that are being faced? So someone like you who has those expertise in translation to say, I'm just going to regurgitate this back to you. This is what it will actually do. This is what it will say.
Yeah.
People that are really into numbers, we can prove it with numbers. People that are into the concept and the storytelling and the customer value or whatever that looks like, we can say this, and then it's this multifaceted story
Yeah.
with a whole bunch of different chapters and verses in it.
And I can tell you a story because I actually take it one step further, and I love to throw in an element of competition.
Right.
So we had one of the big projects I did at Shaw, which is now Rogers, was we migrated our enterprise data warehouse. For everyone who's not in data integration, it's where all the data across the whole company comes together. And it was in this really, really old system, and we needed to migrate it to the cloud. Now, on face value, our business wasn't getting anything different. It was still their data. It was still the same reports, etc. But what we ended up doing in the process was we challenged them to make it an innovation competition within their own teams, because we needed them to move over for us to finish the project. And if you're dragging people along, no one comes. But we flipped the way we did the program. So we actually put all the front end connection changes up front. And so they had time to make the changes, but we challenged them to modernize their process, add automation, look for some new ways of doing it. And then when we gave our reports on how things were going, it wasn't about like how many pipelines have we cut over. It was all about what were the wins that the business was getting. So we used that platform migration to celebrate them. And then we also did a bit of a running score on how many things they had migrated. Because again, we needed them to get done before we could fully cut over. And so every month we had an executive report, which went VP by VP and basically showed green, yellow, red. And so the VPs and all their peers saw exactly how much they were involved in this migration. And it is amazing how that combination of stick and carrot, they started telling us why it mattered. They started sharing us the things that they had modernized that we had never even thought about. And so it wasn't this boring back end project that we were doing. It was all of a sudden this entire business transformation program that everyone had skin in the game to complete. And if they didn't, it was very visible.
That's tremendous to be able to do that, to add some sort of engagement collateral, whether it be competition, whether it be something else, to just almost basically take people out of themselves, instead of dragging the technical teams along, as you alluded to earlier there, and saying it just has to get done, it has to get done at this point, and things, and then gamifying it. Gamification is certainly something that's becoming more and more part of conversations that I have these days, and given that little bit of a excitement factor, something different, and then when the results come out, I could just imagine some of the VPs going, oh, wait a second, why is that yellow? Why is that red? That was green before, was it not? And then wait a minute, we have to put some different types of styles of resources towards this. That's genius. Absolutely genius.
It was fun. And the other thing that we had is I had some friends in security, and I'm like, can you tell me like the worst case scenario that would happen if we didn't do this? And they came up with like $2.1 billion risk. And I wave that around all the time. I'm like, you don't want to be the team accountable for this risk. I mean, if there was a data issue or a breach, and it's finding what you have. And like, again, that combination of like celebrating people's accomplishments and achievements, but also like, if we don't do this, there's serious costs and security risks, etc. And just making that story really fulsome.
Yeah, and sometimes that can be very difficult to sell when it's in the invisible, as you say. The customer journey is no different. The protection of their assets is likely different and more robust and certainly future proof. But it's sometimes, as a former IT project manager, it's sometimes very difficult to get people to care. And even the people who genuinely should and who know better, even just to get them to care as well, because you don't get to see it. It's just more process improvements or enhancing the system.
And a lot of times technical people will raise a risk, but they'll do it in a way that doesn't resonate with leaders. And so they may take it as something that's like an acceptable risk. And then the technical person will go away and be like, I can't believe that VP or that leader, they just like, they don't get it. But it's this is again where that partnership and that understanding is like, you have to speak in terms of your audience. You have
Yeah.
to be able to raise your points in a way that will be heard and listened to. And if it's something that you feel very passionate about and you haven't broken through, it doesn't mean you're done. It means you
Yeah.
have to keep finding a different way. Like if that risk is
Yeah.
legitimate, then you have to be able to let people know, because if you're only coming at things from your perspective and people aren't understanding, it's on you. You still have that ball of accountability. You have
Yeah.
not passed it over for someone
Yeah.
else. And when you find how to break through, they may have context that helps settle you down. It may be something that, it's an acceptable risk. There's other priorities, etc. But then at least you know that you had a full conversation and you haven't, left that ball sitting on the floor instead of with someone to take forward or to put on
Yeah.
a shelf.
Yeah. Definitely. And it's so it talks to me about the experiences that people are having. You can communicate literally the exact same message to 10 people, 5 are online, 5 are in person. They literally have the exact same access to the exact same information from the exact same source, and there are 11 different experiences happening at the exact same time. So to then have someone with your type and style of skill set and probably the people on your team, the ability to be able to say, okay, now everybody has the first version. We now have an opportunity to go to each party and say, did you get
Mhm.
what you needed from that? Do you understand what it means for you? Can you commit to what we need to commit to going forward? And really genuinely seeing
Yep.
people, that
Yep.
ability to say, like, I understand it's not just carte blanche or a blanket approach to things and then carving up the time, because you're going to have to do it at some point. So the best time to do it would be a wee bit ahead of time rather
Yep.
than when it starts to hit the fan at some point later in the day. And then, you're going to stakeholders that are saying, oh, now you're ready to talk, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a lot of that comes down to confidence. And I mean, I was lucky. I got a stint through my career as a consultant. And, I found that was a great experience because you don't have direct power. No one
Yeah,
reports to you. No one has to do what you say. You have to lead through influence.
yeah,
But you also are in a position where if you're not adding value, if you're not, making your points heard, well, you're not on that site for very long. You're not with that
exactly.
client because you're not doing anything for them.
Yeah,
So that skill, and again, as a consultant, you kind of get a bit of a benefit sometimes where you don't have to play in the hierarchy. You
yeah,
can go throughout to whom you need to get the point across. And I think that that's a skill I tried to bring when I went into a large organization. I tried
mhm,
to still operate in that non-binary by hierarchy position, um, because if you are in a spot where people just do what you say, you are at risk of them not giving you the best solution and then not telling you the things that you aren't thinking about. Um, and I think that when you are in a large organization, you can get bound by the hierarchy, but you also have to realize people are busy, but people want to do the right thing, but they need the right information in order to make those tough decisions or to assess risk or to make that call. And so, again, how do you build the confidence in yourself, in your ideas? How do you pull in the right perspectives to make sure that, when you have identified a real concern, that it is getting to the right people and then you understand, and whether you're not aligned or you at least accept the decision,
yeah,
that you kind of get on board and you kind of done everything you can in that space.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's gold dust, absolutely. So it's almost a great segue into the volunteer work that you've done. I mentioned some of the organisations that you've been part of thus far. What was the real genuine human inspiration that WCT became a thing for you to then progress through to becoming the chair of the Alberta chapter?
Yeah. Well, again, just from that experience, especially like mid career, like taking a hard right pivot in your mid 30s was very eye opening. And I had taken for granted some of the challenges that women in a technical field have been facing if they started or if they've changed.
Yeah,
And I always said, like, it's a good thing I came in here with a lot of confidence. Otherwise, I'd be pretty beat down. And I realized, like, not everyone comes with that confidence,
yeah,
and I thought that, there's so many great people out there that are holding themselves back, that might not trust their gut or take that risk. And so when I was introduced to WCT, I thought, oh, what a cool organization, because it's not about just going to an event. It's about the series of materials, webinars, resources, connections, mentorship opportunities. And it's really about building yourself up. It's not about, take these 5 steps and then you've got a job in tech. It's not. It's really about, growing yourself, cultivating yourself. And so when I joined it, I thought, yeah, this is a really cool place. And then when I had the opportunity to join the board, I've always been on boards and volunteering. I usually had contribute in some facet. And I thought, this is a great chance for me to kind of use my perspective and my story to help other women get out of their own way. And then there's just so many different avenues that people can use WCT to help them in that journey.
Yeah, it's incredible, like giving people that community platform to be able to learn together, to grow together, to see if you come in as a junior person, for example, and you're looking at other more senior people there, you have that opportunity for mentorship, for an ability to just, can you tell me how you did it? How can I get to that particular spot and place and space in my career? What would you say was one of the more poignant moments of your journey within WCT?
We've had some pretty amazing panels. And last year, for instance, we had a panel where we had this amazing founder of a coaching firm, Brightwire Leadership, Christina Dejanez. I don't know if you know her, but she's a fabulous speaker and moderator. And we were able to get this powerhouse panel. We had, people like the chief of staff for the mayor. We had an engineer from Spartan. We had a VP from NMAX.
I was there.
And yes, that's right, Gary. You were there. It was great, wasn't it?
It was brilliant. Yeah, it was absolutely brilliant.
Well, and what I thought was so cool about this is you could see people resonate with different parts, and you saw people in the audience identifying with different people on the panel and like really keying into their story. Because I think there's a lot of times when we're like, I must be the only one with this challenge. I must be the only one with this situation. And so much comfort and hope and inspiration comes out of seeing someone who's been there and then actually hearing how they overcame it. And I found the most interesting part of that, I don't know if you saw at the end of the event, but Nan, our engineer from Spartan, she just was like a rock star. There were all these women who just so associated with, she called herself an introvert. She was an engineer and, so many people related to that. And she was the superstar. And she joked because when I asked her to be on the panel, she's like, why do you want me? And I'm like, because like, you're amazing. But she in herself didn't see herself as someone that people would see themselves and look up to. But I think she got the lion's share of attention. And so it just shows like how many different perspectives and journeys you can share in that kind of setting and how much you can really impact people in the room.
Yeah, it was very, very impactful. And as you say, very well moderated. One of the reasons that I've taken a keen interest, of course, my love is part of the board, Erin, and she has educated me over the years about the underrepresentation of women in key positions in the workplace, the salary disparity and things like that. And I have to admit, like in the beginning, I kind of thought she was joking. I was like, that's not the case. And it's not because I'm a pig or a chauvinist or anything like that. My career, as I reflected upon it, Shannon, was most of my career, apart from 2 times, let's say, I have worked for very, very competent, charismatic, strong leaders who were female. So my purview was I would go anywhere she goes. If she asks me to do something, I will do it because I know that it's been well thought out. It's the right thing to do. We'll figure it out together as we go forward. So that's my paradigm. So then when Erin starts to introduce to me the fact that that's not the normal circumstance or situation that a lot of females experience in the workplace. Obviously these women were exceptional and you had a good opportunity to learn and grow with them at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Then when she started to provide some facts and figures, some data, and then when I got a little bit of a purview into the role and the importance of WCT and other organizations that are similar to that out there, it's shocking. It's embarrassing, actually.
Well, and Gary, what I find really interesting about this is I actually coach and mentor men and females the same. I don't actually think it's just a female thing. And I personally don't believe in quotas and targets and things, because I think that can drive a different behavior. And I also think it can take away from people who've earned a spot, if there's any misconceptions of that.
Yeah.
But the stats are there. There is not the same representation, and it's even worse when you look at women of color. I can find the stat for you afterwards, but I have a graph that was run, and it's basically like to get to parity. I think women are 27 years away, and women of color are 42 years away. It's crazy how that still is a gap.
Yeah.
But I think that there's been a lot of focus on how do we fix that. But what I like about WCT is it's not always that there's companies and people holding women back. I do believe there's an element of women not going for some of these roles. Okay. And that's where it comes from. Like, are you building the competence? Are you understanding that you're a journey and you can go for something if you don't check off every single box? And so I think it's a two-way street. And I really like that WCT is kind of focused on that individual growth so that women can put themselves into those positions. Now, there's a lot of other, programs and opportunities where you can look at it from the other angle. But I also get really upset when there's that connotation that, well, it must be men holding them back. Because I have had a similar experience to you where I have had great female leadership and I've had great male leadership and support. So I've been very fortunate to not feel like that's the situation. But going to some of these different events and hearing stories, your world is what you think is normal, but you don't know what someone else's normal is. Yeah. And so I think for me, it's not to kind of rest on the laurels of like, I haven't faced something specific, so there must not be a problem. It's like, give everyone the chance to have that seat at the table, give everyone the chance to have the confidence and get the tools they need, and let them do their thing and get out of their way so they can, achieve those goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of, each fiscal year or each calendar year, however organizations are structured, there's typically a theme that the organization will say, we're going to focus more on this for this particular year. What does that look like for WCT in 2025?
We don't have a theme this year, actually. And we talked about it for a while. And, it's such a dynamic place that we decided to let each event kind of come to life in its own way. Because sometimes those themes will evolve based on who you bring to the table for presenters or keynotes or panels. And so we had done themes in the past, and we ended up, you almost feel like you're kind of sticking an event into something that doesn't quite fit. So we left it very organic this year so that the right programs could kind of percolate up. I do know from the national level, they've had a big focus on pay equity. So we've had a number of series of webinars and great talks and it's not about, hey, you're not getting paid enough, you should complain about it. It's like, what are you doing in the interview process to have those hard conversations? What are you doing to prepare in advance to do your research so that you have a business case for what you should be being paid? And that's, again, what I really appreciate. It's not an organization that's finger pointing about what can you do for me. It's really an organization of like, are you doing what you need to do for yourself?
Yeah, and creating that narrative there early on. It's so poignant because just recently, in the last couple of weeks, we were having a conversation about essentially building up the foundations of your career path and how you can intentionally lean into each and every part. And one part of it was what type and style of role are you looking for? So you go from more general to specific. What industry are you interested in?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what organizations operate in that industry? What associations or bodies are out there that support the actual industry in and of itself? Is there a particular company with a particular role that you're looking for? If so, what are the salary expectations for that particular role based on the level that you would be going into? And the
Mm-hmm.
majority, not everyone, but the majority of people were kind of like, how would I know that? And I
Mm-hmm.
said, that's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just we just kind of blink at each other for a second or two. And how would I find that out? I don't know the industry. You know the industry. You're the person that wants to get there. So
Yeah.
giving them that autonomy and authority very early in their careers to say you can find out a whole bunch of things that you just by asking, you know,
Yeah.
by calling up HR and saying, can you let me know what the salary expectations for this particular role would be? Is it a band? Is it a range of some
Yeah.
description? Is it a firm salary? And figure that part out so that you already have. So what you're really doing in my head anyway, Shannon, is you're taking away the distractions. I've
Mm-hmm.
done the work. I've done the legwork. I know what I am. I know who I am. I know where I want to go in the short term. I can make up my mind about how that
Mm-hmm.
diverges or converges going forward. But I have all the information I need so that when they say, what would your salary expectations be? That you can confidently say, I know the range is this to this.
Yep.
And I believe that based on where I'm at, I would be just beyond the midpoint, for example.
Yep.
And then that person goes, boom, okay, I have more information now than I have. We'll get back to you. Thanks for your information. Move on.
Yeah. And I think the other part that I've really learned over time is we all want more. We all want more money. We all think that we should, I've had some interesting conversations with people who are like 1 or 2 years out of university and they're like, yeah, by, this time in 2 years, I'll be the CEO. And I'm like, what world do you live in? But so sometimes we can have expectations that aren't realistic. And I
Yeah.
think that data gathering is so important because it kind
Yeah.
of gets you back in line. But the other thing that's really important too is like that is just a component of your overall job.
Yeah.
And knowing what actually makes you thrive is so important. For myself, I did a lot of reflecting and really realized that, having a certain degree of autonomy, having the ability to make changes,
Yeah.
being able to feel like I'm adding value and I'm not just, pushing a paper back and forth. Like there's a number of different components to where you get satisfaction and where you feel like, am I continuing to learn? Am I getting new experiences? Am I kind of building up a breadth of knowledge or a
Yeah.
depth of knowledge? And, each company, again, being in consulting, there is no perfect company. There is,
Yeah.
I love the saying is like the grass isn't always greener. It's just where you water and then it gets greener.
Yeah.
And so trying to find that right mix of what am I worth? Am I getting value? Am I growing? Do I feel like those things all come together? I think you need to look at that very holistically because you could
Yeah.
get a job that makes a bunch of money, but you might be miserable. So, you gotta balance it all out.
Absolutely. And being intentional enough about the experiences you're having to say, is this who I am? Is this what I want to do? If not, why not? And
Yeah.
the ability to change your mind. To
Yeah.
say, this is actually what I thought. And I know that through my whole schooling and my adolescent years and my post-secondary, everything led towards this. And I've suddenly realized, and maybe not so suddenly, I've realized over time that this is just not for me.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be a complete roadblock and a catastrophic end to a story. What skills have you accumulated along the way? What network do you have that you didn't have before? You
Yeah.
now have information about the areas where you will thrive and where you will maybe falter or not be yourself. And again, for me, it's the distractions. It's genuinely, literally moving away the distractions of, I hate 70% of my job, but I love this 30%. Is that enough? I've,
Mm-hmm.
By moving forward with intention, saying there are some parts of my job that don't serve the greater cause, but they're a necessary part of this particular role. However, the greater lesson, contribution, value, impact
Mm-hmm.
that I'm having in this is good for me for right now. I can give my best. They will get my best. Everyone wins out of this, and I'll use these as building blocks to move forward. I don't see everyone thinking along those lines in terms of the necessary foundational platforms and building blocks.
Yeah. And I also don't think that we're always as grateful as we need to be because when you start looking at what you don't have, you can build a pretty big list, and you can forget a lot of good things that you are gaining and receiving from a job. I love the quote that comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
there's so many times when, and if you focus on yourself and what you aren't getting, it can be a brutal downward spiral.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about leadership, is like when you are able to actually help other people, you get such a charge from seeing someone else's career flourish.
Yeah.
You get such, it's so rewarding where through your coaching, your involvement, you're nudging in the right direction. This person has just realized their potential and got that promotion or been recognized across the board. And those are those moments where you're like, yeah, like even if you had a whole bunch of things in your job that you didn't like, you're like, I have the opportunity to help someone else along the way.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty powerful. But I
Yeah.
don't think we always focus on that part. It's like, I'm not getting this, I'm not getting that. But it's like, yeah, but like what an opportunity to be able to help someone else and an organization and learn all along
Yeah.
the way. Like,
Definitely, there's always somewhere else or some other way, I should say, to look at things, and not to pretend that the other factors that are disappointing or less than fruitful or nourishing for your career are not material. Yes, of course they are, but the opportunity to say it's genuinely not all bad, and is this, doing that weighing exercise, is this enough of a benefit or a gift or opportunity I get to serve other people? Does that take away the kind of more sucky parts of the role?
we all have sucky parts of the role. If anybody has a perfect job, please let me know, because there's always a sucky part.
Yeah, exactly. So back to WCT, you mentioned briefly earlier there in terms of the national are working on pay equity for this year. Does that have what does the relationship look like between the local chapters and the national
Yeah, you bet.
organization?
So WCD National has, a small group of people who are running our bigger programs. So those will be a lot of virtual webinars. They have different resource groups, mentorship pods, etc. They also work on some pretty big level programming that meet women at various stages of their career. So there's programs for early career, mid-career, and senior C-suite.
Yeah.
Those types of programs are really they're really amazing, and there's a big commitment that you build a deep network with that group. Then each of the provinces or local areas has their own chapter, which we run our own local events. This usually comes in the form of in-person, but it may also be a webinar or a virtual connect.
Yeah.
But it's an extension of the national offering, but it allows people to connect locally. And you build your network and you build your exposure with people that way. Now, all of the boards are volunteer led, which means, it's a working board. As Aaron knows, you got to roll up your sleeves and get in there. It doesn't just happen. Someone's got to make it happen. But it's also interesting because I really like using that volunteer platform to also stretch that networking muscle.
Yeah.
So when I left consulting, one of the things I missed was the opportunity to connect with people outside of my organization. I'm in a massive organization, so you could full time just be meeting people internally.
Yeah.
WCT is such a beautiful platform because it gives me an excuse to reach out to people from a totally different perspective. So even though I'm volunteering, I'm getting something out of this personally by meeting people like yourself and going on this podcast or reaching out to an old colleague of mine and being like, you'd be a great panelist, or, hey, I need a mentor for this speed mentoring. And it's such a lovely way to encourage people to stay connected, but it also gives me a chance to celebrate and showcase some of the great female leaders I've met throughout my career. Because I think that part of this is just people are always like, oh, you want me to be a mentor? You want me to be a speaker? I'm like, yeah, you're phenomenal. And again, people don't think of themselves in that way. So having a platform where you can elevate people and help other people learn and benefit from it, it's such a win-win. So I love volunteering for this organization for that reason.
Oh, I love that. I really do love that, and I'll tell you why. A good pal of mine is also my tattoo artist and has been for over a decade. And I had said to him, talking about creating competition and
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, to move things forward, I interviewed recently a fellow from Australia about the role of tattoos in your ongoing self-development journey, and you know, the patterns and the things that you can learn depending on what type and style of work you've got over the years. And I said, this guy's coming on my podcast. And he's like, who is he? You know, and so there's a little bit of, you know, possessiveness there. And I said, well, he's not competing with you because Steve, my guy, has a whole bunch of other kind of business ideas going on. And I said, well, he's here to talk about the journey and such. And then on the day of the interview, I says, today's interview day. And by the way, just to let you know, and he says, I bet the guy's going to be crap. He's going to be terrible or something like that. But I'd mooted the idea of him coming on the pod at the beginning, and he said, not interested. I've got too much on the go. You know, I've got itchy teeth. There's a whole bunch of different excuses he can use. By the time from the initial contact to the interview day and then afterwards, he had said, tell me a bit more about that podcast. Like what sort of setup do you need? What sort of, like, how much does it cost? We were chatting about that when we were having our pre-conversation. And I says, I tell you what, let's go for a drink one night and I'll talk and walk you through it. Because in between times I had said, listen, like we've spent hundreds of hours together over the years, you know, and the types and styles of conversations we have, the experiences you've had with different types of styles of people, customer service, art, business, you know, you're a good conversationalist. You're really good at it. And that's percolated over time. He still hasn't agreed to come on the pod, but it's percolated over time. And exactly to your point, Shannon, like, it felt great just pausing for that second to take that opportunity to say, I've never shared this with you, but here are some things that I've noticed that I really appreciate about you. And here's some qualities that you have that not everyone has. And I just, you know, maybe if other people have told you, that's great, but I would just like to tell you myself. And it seems, as I say, it's kind of percolating. We'll see at some point in the future whether that comes through, but completely analogous to what you're saying for sure.
Well, and people don't know what kind of an impact they have when nobody tells them.
Yeah.
WCT has a Leadership Excellence Award, and there's another amazing female leader in our network space. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to nominate her. And I don't know her that well. Like, I didn't know her enough to be able to fill out all parts of the application. And so I went around to her peers. I went to her, you know, people who worked for her, people she worked with, her leadership, and every single one of them on a moment's notice was like, yep, booking meetings, sending me notes. And I was trying to do it without telling her because she's incredibly humble.
Yeah.
And eventually I got to a point where I'm like, ooh, I'm going to need to fact check some of these stories. And so, you know, her response was just blown away. She's like, I can't believe that anyone's nominating me. I'm like, oh yeah, there's like a whole bunch. And she kept trying to, like, well, this won't happen. This won't happen. I'm like, this is happening. So you can either make sure that what I have is true or not. But, you know, it was so cool because everybody was so excited to share what an impact she had had on them. Everyone was so happy to tell, you know, how inspirational she was as a leader, how she impacted them both personally and other people. They've seen it. And, you know, sometimes there's just these mechanisms, whether it be an award or a panel or an event. And, you know, just not just having a great story and a great, you know, presentation, but just having those people actually appreciate that they have had an impact, that they are good leaders. And again, sometimes it's just, you need that space for people, like almost like the excuse for people to be able to share those stories. Because, you know, let's be honest, we're not at the water cooler being like, oh my God, you're so great. That's kind of weird.
Exactly. Incredible. So this is The Best You, a coaching podcast, and I like to try and end the interviews with a question of the guest to say, what is one regular practice that you employ that gives you the best opportunity to be the best version of yourself, Shannon?
I do a lot of self-reflection, but I'm also very opportunistic in the sense that I believe in being versatile and looking for connections that may not be obvious, both for people around me and for myself. And by kind of having that self-reflection of like, what do I want to do? What do I like? What am I good at? What's a challenge there? What's a new skill? And then being opportunistic to say, hey, there's this project over here, or there's this volunteer opportunity over there. I do find that if you have a pretty good handle on what you are at your core and don't get as caught up with the details of title, role, company, etc., you can find some pretty amazing opportunities. And that's something that I always try to do so that I keep excited and engaged and growing.
Excellent. Fabulous. Before I let you go, where can people find out more about you and about WCT?
So I have LinkedIn. Search me up. Happy to connect. And WCT, we have a website, so I can drop that in with you, and you can post that in the show notes.
Excellent. I'll do that. Shannon, thank you very, very much for taking the time. It's absolutely flown by. I've loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Oh, this has been so fun. Thanks so much for having me, Gary. It's been an honor.